My dad beat me in front of my son for not paying my brother's debt. I made sure they regret it. I was 29, a single mother, and the only one in my family with a steady job. My parents treated me like a walking ATM. While my younger brother, Drew, 25, hadn't held a job longer than a few months. He was the golden child. I was the default caretaker. Always available, always disposable. It started small. My parents would say things like, "Drew's struggling. Help him out a little." And I did. At first, I helped with his community college tuition, paid for his Jeep repairs, sent money, just until he gets back on his feet. But Drew never stood on his own, and my parents never stopped asking. I lived modestly in a rented townhouse in suburban Phoenix with my son Mason, who was 9. Everything I did for him. School lunches, clothes, soccer cleats, his karate classes. He was quiet and thoughtful, always watching. And he was watching the day everything changed. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I got the text from Mom. "Rent is due. Help your brother out. We raised you better than this." I ignored it. I had just paid for Mason's orthodontic consultation and couldn't afford to bail Drew out again. 2 hours later, they showed up at my place. No warning. Mom didn't knock. She banged on the door like a debt collector. Dad stood behind her with that smug look he always wore when he was about to lecture me about family responsibility. "Why aren't you answering our messages?" Mom snapped as I opened the door, still in my Target uniform for my shift. "I've already told you. I can't pay Drew's rent this month." "Oh, so your son's braces consultation is more important than your brother's roof?" Dad said sarcastically, stepping inside without being invited. "I'm not responsible for his lifestyle," I said, standing my ground in my own living room. "He had options. He chose not to work. Don't put that on me." That's when things escalated. Mom threw her Coach purse across the room, screaming, "Ungrateful brat. You think you're better than us now?" Before I could even process it, she slapped me hard across the face. The sting was immediate, but the shock was worse. Dad grabbed my arm and shoved me toward the wall. I stumbled, hitting the corner of our IKEA bookshelf. Blood pooled at my hairline where I'd struck the sharp edge. Mason screamed. "Mom!" he cried, running toward me from the kitchen where he'd been doing homework. But Mom stopped him. "Stay out of this, little boy. Maybe if your mother listened like Drew does, she wouldn't get punished." Punished? Like I was some child again, not a grown woman with her own child being assaulted in her own home. I stood up shaking, tasting blood in my mouth. Mason was crying, his small hands trembling as he clutched his math worksheet. He saw everything I had tried to shield him from for years. "You need to leave," I said through gritted teeth, pressing a dish towel to my bleeding scalp. "We'll leave when you transfer the money," Dad barked, settling into my second-hand couch like he owned it. "Until then, we'll stay and make sure you don't waste any more of it on unnecessary things." They sat in my living room like they owned the place. My blood dripping onto the beige carpet didn't matter. My son crying in the corner didn't matter. All they cared about was Drew's rent, $200 for his studio apartment in Tempe that I knew he used more for parties than sleeping. Mom pulled out her phone and started scrolling through my Venmo history. "I see you sent money to Mason's school last week. You sent money to Progressive Insurance. You've got money, Elena. You're just being selfish." "That's my son's lunch account and my car insurance, Mom. You know, responsible adult things." Dad leaned forward menacingly. "Your brother is family. Mason will understand when he's older. Family comes first." Mason is my family. Drew is a 25-year-old man who chooses to play video games instead of work. That's when Dad stood up, his face red with rage. "You're going to transfer that money right now, or we're not leaving. Your neighbors can hear us arguing. Do you want them to know what kind of daughter you really are?" Mason tugged at my sleeve. "Mom, I'm scared," he whispered. I looked down at my son, this innocent boy who'd never asked for any of this chaos, and something inside me shifted. Not cracked, not broke, but crystallized into something harder than diamond. "Get out," I said quietly. "Get out of my house right now." Dad took a step toward me. "Or what? You'll call the police on your own parents? You'll destroy this family over money?" I'll call them if you don't leave in the next 60 seconds. Mom laughed bitterly. You don't have the backbone, Elena. You never did. That's why you're still working retail at 29 while Drew's figuring out his path. I pulled out my phone. 50 seconds. They looked at each other, uncertain for the first time. Dad's bravado flickered. This isn't over, he said, grabbing Mom's purse. You'll regret choosing strangers over your own blood. 40 seconds. They left, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. But their words echoed in the sudden silence. This isn't over. They were right. It wasn't over. But not in the way they expected. That night, I locked myself and Mason in my bedroom. He lay beside me, holding my hand with his small fingers. Mom, he whispered, why do Grandma and Grandpa hate you? I didn't answer immediately. I didn't have simple words for complex cruelty. But in that moment, something in me shifted completely. The daughter who'd spent years trying to earn love that would never come died that night. What emerged was a mother who would protect her son at any cost. The next morning, I drove Mason to Roosevelt Elementary with concealer covering my bruises. Then I drove straight to downtown Phoenix, to a building I'd been quietly connected to for over a year. My name wasn't on any lease, but I knew who owned several properties around the city. And I knew something my parents didn't. For the past 18 months, I'd been putting away everything I could. Every raise from Target, every tax refund, every side gig babysitting the neighbors' kids. I wasn't just saving. I was investing. And one of those investments was quietly buying the very duplex my parents lived in. The one they'd rented for 8 years in the Maryvale neighborhood, a foreclosure I'd purchased cheap through an LLC. They never knew their monthly rent checks were being deposited into an account that would eventually circle back to me. But now I had a new idea. If they wanted to remind me what family meant, I was about to redefine it on my terms. I didn't tell anyone what I was about to do. Not my best friend Carmen, not my shift supervisor at Target, not even the lawyer I'd consulted about the LLC. I wanted silence, precision, and power. For once in my life, I didn't want to explain myself to anyone. I wanted to act. That Thursday, while Mason was at school, I drove to the Maricopa County Courthouse. The bruises on my arms were still visible, and I had photos of everything. I filed an emergency order of protection. The clerk looked at my documentation. Domestic violence by parents against their adult daughter? They beat me in front of my 9-year-old son because I wouldn't pay my brother's rent. She didn't blink. You're doing the right thing. This will be processed within 24 hours. Next, I called the property management company that handled my duplex, the one my parents had been renting from for years without knowing I was the owner behind the LLC. Are they current on rent? I asked, already knowing the answer. Actually, they're 2 months behind. We were about to send a notice. Don't. I'll handle it personally. That evening, my parents had the audacity to text me. Dad, you embarrassed this family today. Drew called crying because he can't make rent. Mom, Mason needs to learn who the real villains are. You're poisoning him against us. Dad, you'll regret choosing outsiders over your own brother. Blood is thicker than water. They didn't know I had already prepared a certified letter with a 30-day eviction notice. And they didn't know what was coming next. But Drew did. Sort of. I ran into him at the Fry's grocery store on Saturday. He was loading his cart with energy drinks and frozen pizzas, clearly not the groceries of someone truly struggling. Still playing the victim, he scoffed, not even bothering to look at the fading bruises on my face. You mean the victim of your freeloading? I said calmly, pushing my cart past him toward the produce section. I'm not playing anything. You're about to watch your whole world collapse. He blinked, confused. What are you talking about? I didn't answer. Some people only learn by falling. And Drew was about to take a very long fall. The eviction notice arrived at my parents' duplex on Monday morning. Mom called me at work, screaming through the phone so loudly my coworker could hear. How could you do this to us? We've lived here for 8 years. I stepped outside Target for privacy. The same way you could hit your daughter in front of her child. Easy. Where are we supposed to go? She cried. I have a heart condition. Your father's unemployment barely covers groceries. That's your problem, I said, watching a roadrunner dart across the parking lot. But if you need help, maybe Drew can pay your rent with all that money I've been sending him. Silence on the other end. Then she hung up. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. I felt clean, like I'd finally washed years of manipulation and abuse off my skin. But the real confrontation was still coming. And this time, I wouldn't be alone. The next 2 weeks were chaos. My parents tried to contact every relative from here to Tucson, painting me as cruel, ungrateful, mentally unstable. I stayed quiet. I didn't need to defend myself to people who'd watched me be their ATM for years without saying a word. Instead, I focused on Mason. We looked at houses online together. Small ones, but with yards where he could play and no history of violence in the living room. Will we be safe there? He asked, looking at pictures of a ranch house in Chandler with a desert landscape front yard. We'll be safer than we've ever been, I promised. Meanwhile, my parents were frantically calling Drew, who, according to the last angry voicemail I received, was suddenly too busy with job interviews to help with their housing crisis. Poetic justice had its own timing. Exactly 30 days from the eviction notice, I stood across the street from the duplex I'd grown up visiting. They had to be out by 6 p.m. The front yard was cluttered with cardboard boxes, a broken patio set, and my mother's ceramic angel collection wrapped in old newspapers. My father was pacing like a caged animal. Drew was nowhere to be seen. Apparently, he'd driven to Las Vegas to clear his head and look for work. Of course. I crossed the street slowly, Mason holding my hand. He had his backpack with his sketch pad sticking out. I didn't plan for him to witness this, but he'd asked to come. I want to see what it looks like when bullies get what they deserve, he'd said. The moment they saw me, my mother rushed forward. Elena, you can't be serious, she snapped, dragging a suitcase with a broken wheel. We're your family. You're throwing us out like garbage. I looked at her without flinching. I was garbage to you when I needed protection. When Mason needed protection. You hit me like I was nothing. And now you want sympathy. My dad stomped toward us. You think money gives you power? You've become arrogant. You're just a renter who bought herself a crown. No, I said. I became the landlord of my own life. And yours. He reached for my arm, but this time I didn't freeze. I didn't cower. Touch me again, I said sharply, and the Mesa police will arrive faster than your next lie. He stopped. Something in his eyes shifted. Maybe for the first time, he realized he couldn't scare me anymore. Mason stepped slightly forward, his 9-year-old voice quiet but clear. You shouldn't have hurt my mom. You lied about love. My mother's lip trembled, but she didn't apologize. She never did. You'll regret this, she hissed. When we're living in our car, when your father's blood pressure kills him, when Drew ends up on the streets, that's on you. No, I said, feeling lighter than I had in years. Drew's choices are on Drew. Your choices are on you. And my choices are finally on me. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder. Since you're so concerned about family responsibility, here's something you should know. I handed them a copy of the LLC paperwork. I've been your landlord for over a year. Every rent check you've written, every month you've been late, every time you've complained about the broken AC, you've been dealing with me. Dad's face went white. That's impossible. I bought this place in foreclosure 18 months ago. The same money you guilted me into sending Drew? I invested it. While you were teaching him to be a parasite, I was learning to be a predator. Mom sank onto their old couch, the one now sitting in the driveway. You planned this. You've been planning this for months. I planned to be independent. You planned to keep me dependent. I guess we both succeeded. Drew's beat-up Honda Civic pulled up then, music blasting. He got out wearing new Nike shoes and a Lakers jersey I knew cost more than most people's grocery budget. What's going on? He asked, looking at the boxes and furniture scattered across the lawn. Your sister owns our house, Dad said bitterly. She's kicking us out because we asked her to help family. Drew looked at me with confusion, then anger. You own their house? How? The same way you own those new shoes. Money. The difference is, I worked for mine. This is sick, Elena. They're old. They need help. They need to learn consequences. Just like you do. I turned to leave, then stopped. Oh, Drew? Your studio apartment? I bought that building too. You have 30 days. That evening, I sat in our new kitchen in Chandler, the house with the desert yard that Mason had loved online. We'd closed on it the week before, and everything still smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Mason was at the table doing homework, occasionally looking up to smile at me. The lavender I'd planted by the front window was already blooming, filling the room with peace. Do you feel better now? Mason asked, swinging his legs under the chair. I thought for a moment. I feel clean, I said, like something heavy was washed away. He nodded like he understood. 3 weeks later, I got a Facebook message from a cousin in Tucson. My parents were staying in a weekly motel near the airport. Drew had moved back in with them after losing his apartment, and all three were sharing one room with a kitchenette. No one was rushing to save them. They had burned every bridge, called in every favor, and exhausted every relative's patience. I never replied to the message. Instead, I posted a picture of Mason holding his latest drawing, a small house with 2 stick figures and a sun smiling overhead. The caption read, "We don't live in fear anymore." And we didn't. The best part? Drew finally got a job. At a Target in Tucson. Full-time, $15 an hour, just like his big sister started with years ago. Sometimes the best revenge is watching someone learn to stand on their own 2 feet. Even if it takes losing everything to teach them how. Subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything.